Welcome back to the She Does This podcast, where we have honest conversations with real women on how they do it. I'm your host, Jordy Lucas, and before I kick off today's episode, I just want to say a huge thank you to Element Melbourne for hosting us for our recording today. Element Melbourne is a stunning boutique hotel in Richmond, which is family and pet friendly, perfect for your next Melbourne getaway. Well, this is our last episode for 2020, so we thought we'd finish the year by recapping the 5 most downloaded episodes. 2020 has been a year that's tested us like no other, so it was amazing to talk to so many inspirational women on how they made it through, but also hear about their lives and careers so far. We've also had some really important conversations, so it's great to be able to recap some of those with you. Let's kick things off with episode number 5, the 5th most downloaded episode of 2020 with Ashy Bines. Now, unless you've been living under a social media rock, you will know who Ashy Bines is. You will know that name. She is a force on social media with millions of followers worldwide, and this year she released her book, 15 Lessons That Changed My Life. In this episode, Ashy and I discuss the impact that online bullying and trolls have had on her life. And I really have to thank Ashy for sharing so honestly, but we do have to issue a content warning on this that we do discuss suicide. Here is my chat with Ashy Bines. So lesson 7 was a huge one, asking for help. And you discuss some pretty heavy and dark moments, particularly around the impact that this trolling had on you. And what I found most ironic, I guess, is that your ethos, you know, what you're always talking about is lifting women up. But there was a group of women who just wanted to tear you down, essentially. A lot of people say as well, oh, what can you expect when you have a public profile? No, that's not. We need to change the narrative around that, I think.
100%.
Tell me about sort of the early days of it when you first became aware of this trolling.
Yeah, I mean, it was a few years ago now. I think I almost had that mindset like, you know, there's always going to be people that don't like what you do. It's just part of putting yourself out there. That's what everyone had told me, like, grow thick skin. Like, you know, yeah, what do you expect? So I almost spoke to myself like that, like, get over it. This is a part of the game. This is part of, putting yourself out there, and you've got to put up with it. What can you do about it? And I just started to get sent things on the daily all the time. And it started to just be so overwhelming. And when I would do something or say something online, because I talk a lot on Snapchat and Instagram, everything was getting screenshotted. Everything was getting reported back to this group, and this group was growing very, very fast. So when something would happen, the head of the group, I suppose, would tell everyone in that group, and there's thousands of girls in this group, to go onto my Instagram profile and start commenting, you know, whatever. So I'd post a photo, and then within minutes, there's so many comments of hate. And this was on all of my platforms. It was not just about me, it was about my family, about what I look like, about my businesses, about my friends' businesses. It was just so overwhelming. So I had to turn all the comments off. But then they go onto another platform, and they'll always find a way. And then even people that loved and supported me would send me things and be like, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this person said this about you. This person's threatening your son. This person's put your address online. This person's, you know, said this and that. So it's like, no matter where I went, no matter what I did, I just felt like I couldn't escape and I couldn't breathe. It was horrific. It was so hard. And now I'm a parent too. Like, I can't imagine like how my mum would have felt, how Steve would have felt. I was so sad and living in fear and worried and not myself. Like, Taj would have felt that. He would have seen that mummy wasn't okay. It was a really, really challenging time. The darkest time of my life, that's for sure. I would not wish that upon anyone. It was horrific. It was awful.
Part of the book said that you believe the only way to stop the pain and fear and no longer be a burden to my family and friends was for me to end my life. So these people have got you to that point, which is just horrific. But you then go on to kind of speak from a place of love, and you forgive these people. How do you speak from a place of love and forgiveness when they got you to that point where you thought that it was best for you to end your life?
It was a very big transition, one that took me a long time to truly get through. That was an awful time. But what I learned, and I still believe this so strongly today, is hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
No one no one is born evil. No one wakes up in the day and says, "Oh, I was gonna swear. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna fuck up Ashy's life today." Like, no one is born wanting to do that. The way I think about it is, if someone is projecting anger and hate online, the louder they are, the more aggressive they are, the more hurt they are. And I just think, God, what has happened to them? Has their mum just passed away? Have they just found out their best friend's got cancer? Have they just been robbed and lost everything? Have they lost their job and then they see me do something and it triggers them, and they don't have the tools, the education, the support, the space, the love, a hug? They have nothing to help them move through that. And they've got all this emotion coming up, and I'm using my body language here on a podcast, so you can't see, but all this emotion coming up, and no one's ever taught them or shown them the way. So the only way they know how to do it, I'm not saying it's right, it is never right, but I understand why they do it, and that's their last straw. They don't know how else to handle it. They don't know how else to project what they're feeling, and understand that what they're projecting is a trigger and sometimes a mirror of what they're not feeling enough of.
Do you think as well, though, that there's an element of just jealousy? Because I feel like a lot of these people, you know, tear strips off anyone who is successful or creating their own success. And I feel like sometimes awful comments that you read and things, it's just a bit of tall poppy syndrome.
I think there's a mixture of it all. I feel like there's really people that are very hurt and old wounds, and they're triggered. Maybe a little bit of jealousy. I'm not sure. Also a bit of gossip. I think sometimes like even, you know, and I can understand that too. Like, who doesn't watch the Kardashians? We love knowing what's happening in their relationships and what's happening, you know, in their drama lives. Like, the more drama that's in a reality show, the more addicted we are. So I kind of, from that side, I kind of understand maybe they were just really addicted to knowing what's going on in my life. And when a bit of drama happened or I made a mistake, God forgive me, we all make mistakes. Mine was just in front of millions of people. They fed off that, and it made them sometimes makes them feel better, I suppose. Maybe makes them feel a bit more human because they might have made the same mistake. But there's so many layers to it and so many elements as to why they do it. I can't pinpoint just one thing. I think it's a whole mixture. But the jealousy I can understand as well, because sometimes I've been through stages where I see another woman doing something and I'm like, oh, well, you know, I bet she didn't do that on her own. You know, you have those thoughts.
You do, don't you?
I'm being honest here. We all go, oh, well, you know, that doesn't look that good anyway. And I catch myself so quick. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, you're not going back to that mean girl. And we all went through it in high school. But if we don't work on ourselves and do self-development and peel back our layers and understand who we are at our core and how our childhood affected us, if we don't do all that work, it's just so easy to slip back into that pattern of hate and jealousy and comparison and blaming and not taking any responsibility, or not thinking, oh, now that those feelings come up and I go, oh, okay, why is that? Why am I feeling that with her? Oh, okay, it's because I'm not working on that in my life, so I'm jealous that she's doing it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it could be someone that hasn't, you know, if I feel insecure about my body, it can be easy to be like, well, oh, they're naturally lucky, or they're genetically like this. And then I'm like, oh, hang on a second. Yeah, I haven't been really looking after myself that well, so she's triggered me because she looks amazing. You know, it always comes back to us when we point the finger at someone else. I wish people could see right now, but when you point the finger, there's 3 fingers pointing back at yourself.
Yeah.
So when you point the finger at someone else, what are those 3 things that you're pointing back at yourself that you need to work on? So there's reasons why everyone does everything, and it's all different. There's so many reasons why trolls are trolls, but I just try to come from a place of understanding, because fueling more fire to the situation or hating back, well, it doesn't serve anyone.
Amazing chat with Ashy Bines there. If you want to hear the full episode, head to shedoesthis.com/listen and check out Ashy's episode. And if you or someone you know are struggling, please contact an organisation like Lifeline. Moving on to episode number 4, the 4th most downloaded episode of the podcast this year was our very first episode with Emma Hawkins. Emma is the wife of Geelong football star Tom Hawkins, but we talk about how she has maintained her own sense of identity, both professionally and personally, over the years. Emma also opened up about her choices around mothering, and it was something that I loved hearing from her about demystifying motherhood on Instagram. So here is my chat with Emma Hawkins. I heard you speak at a Nature One Dairy event last year, and one of the things that you spoke about was how much confidence you gained the second time around, particularly around breastfeeding. And I think you said that you actually just didn't.
Yeah.
And it was so refreshing to hear you say, you know, it didn't work out for me the first time. I'm not going to put the pressure on myself. Talk me through how you came to that conclusion that it just wasn't going to happen this time.
I wish that I had heard someone or anyone say that when I was going through it with Arabella, because I felt when I was struggling breastfeeding that I was the only person in the world going to give up and not breastfeed, because no one talks about, people certainly talk about it if they do breastfeed. And I get it. If I breastfed, and I'd be really proud of that too and want to show it off. But it's like, if you choose not to or you can't, you feel this real huge sense of guilt and you're not allowed to be proud of your decision. You feel like you're going to get judged or attacked, and no mum should ever feel like that, no matter what topic we're talking about. When I had Arabella, it was a really horrible experience, and I had a terrible pregnancy. I had prenatal depression because I had hyperemesis, which if anyone has that, it is the most isolating and horrible 9 months.
Did you have it for the whole 9 months?
I had it for the first 22 weeks, but then I had severe osteitis pubis that put me on bed rest. So I don't know what was worse. So it was hard. And then I finally had the baby, and then all of a sudden the breastfeeding was hard again. And I'm like, what? Like, I was really insecure about a lot of things, and I just wasn't finding any of it easy. And I didn't have a lot of friends around me who had babies, and the ones that did, just whether or not I probably didn't ask the questions when they were having babies. So to me, it looked like everything was easy for them. So I put a lot of things out, and after 12 weeks of feeding Arabella and multiple mastitises and just the works, I stopped, and it was finally I could enjoy my baby. And then with Primrose, I had a similar pregnancy, so prenatal depression again, and I was in hospital with hyperemesis and on bed rest, but I had a toddler. And my doctors were amazing, because I started talking about breastfeeding, and I was already at, I think, 18 weeks, I started talking about it, saying, oh, this was my experience. And so I went to a psychologist and I spoke about it. And then when I was in the hospital, after I gave birth to her, it was beautiful. I put her on my breasts and she started feeding straight away. And it was a really, really beautiful moment. And then my milk came in and we had a few feeds, but then the anxiety started, and my doctor was amazing. And he said, you know what? No, you don't need to. You go home and enjoy this time. You have been through enough. And it was such a relief, but it's almost like I shouldn't have had to have had the doctor to say, give me permission in a way, but it was almost like I was, and he didn't say stop it. He said, everything will be fine if you choose not to.
I mean, I had, the similar experience, and our maternal health nurse came, it was like the first visit, and she said to me, I was talking about how I felt this pressure, and she said, you know what, it doesn't work. I don't care how you feed your baby. As long as you're feeding her, I don't care. And I just burst into tears, because it was like I had approval from someone else that I never needed in the first place. I think that episode resonated with a lot of mothers out there, because for some reason we do seek approval from others when it's really us that know our babies best. Our third most listened to episode of 2020 was our conversation with Tully Humphrey. Tully is a social media influencer, but she's also the founder of activewear label Tully Lou. I spoke with Tully all about her rise to Insta fame and business journey so far, but we started the episode hearing about Tully's history with an eating disorder and the comment from her mum that started it all. You said you were diagnosed at 14.
Yeah.
That's such a young age to be going through something so heavy and, really traumatic. Mm-hmm. When did you sort of start to realize that maybe you had a disordered relationship with food and your body?
Well, now that I've done all the work, I know that it came back I got triggered when I was around 7 years old of a comment that, bless, my mother made. And that's, yeah. So, and it was just a silly comment, on the phone to someone that she was speaking to, and I was very athletic growing up, and I was never, a tall beanpole kind of, body type. And I remember her saying one time, "Oh no, don't worry about giving those to Tully. She's got short, stumpy legs." And as a 7-year-old, like, I probably didn't think much of that, but it did affect me now that I think about it in the long run. Yeah. And I was always I never thought I was perfect, or I was always trying to get love, and I just thought having that comment definitely affected me. So I think that's when it definitely started. I wouldn't have, like I said, I kind of know that now that I'm older and I've done the work. And then, so maybe from like 7 to maybe 10, I was fine. And then when I kind of went into grade 6, into year 7, I was so obsessed with food. And at the time, looking back now, that's definitely when it kind of started. But I was so obsessed with food, and I was, getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning. I don't know if you remember Aerobic Oz Style. It was like on at 6:30 on Channel 10. Yeah. So I was doing that, and I was getting up so early. And I think back now and I'm like, well, that's sad. Like, I was still in primary school, and I was, making sure, I was counting calories, very conscious about food. I knew exercise was going to help me look a certain way and all that kind of stuff. So I think looking back now, I think that's probably when it started to progress. But yeah, definitely that comment when I was 7 is probably when it definitely kind of started.
Yeah. And have you had the conversation with your mum about that?
Nope. So no. I actually, so funny. I've mentioned on podcasts and interviews before that there was a comment, but I actually have not. I've spoken to psychologists about it, but publicly I've never said that it was my mum, and I've never said what so you're the first. But I don't know, I feel comfortable now talking about it, but no, I haven't spoken about it to my mum. I'm honestly a little bit scared, because my mum was there with me through my recovery when I was 14, and they say that when you're going through something like that, you're like a 3-year-old person in like a 14-year-old body. So the things that I used to do were crazy, and I feel bad that she was there at the time and seeing those things. It kind of breaks my heart telling her that her comment then was what triggered me. I think maybe one day I'll talk about it, but I'm not ready yet.
I really want to thank Tully again for her honesty and for giving us such an insight into the mind of someone suffering from an eating disorder. If you or someone you know are struggling, please contact the Butterfly Organisation. We're getting close to number 1. Our second most downloaded episode for 2020 was my chat with newly crowned Miss Universe Australia, Maria Thattil. Maria spoke about her experience growing up as an Indian Australian and the effects that inadvertent racism have on her today. How was growing up for you as an Indian Australian? This is something that you speak about a lot. I want to know what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, and thank you for opening up, your platform to having these discussions. I think sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable when we're talking about things, but in order to progress and move forward, we need to be able to speak authentically. And it is an experience, particularly as, what we call a third culture kid, where my parents immigrated to Australia early in the 90s, and then I was born. So I grew up where they had pretty much brought over, their Eastern traditions, Indian culture, norms, food, music, clothes. And then I was growing up, going to school, being around peers who were more used to, I guess, a Western context. So for me, it was feeling like I constantly needed to choose between two different identities. And it was thinking, well, I'm not Indian enough to be Indian, but I'm also not Australian enough to be Australian. So it's constantly compromising elements of who you are to fit whatever the context you found yourself, in. So a lot of that growing up was thinking I needed to denounce elements of my culture, thinking I needed to change my personality and also build a bit of a shell, because where there was limited representation of what it was to be an Indian Australian, people had ideas about who you were and where you came from. So I needed to build a bit of a shell and take, maybe even unwittingly racist jokes in my stride. And I thought I needed to allow this in order to fit in and belong. So growing up for me was feeling like I needed to compromise different identities and thinking that mistreatment and being othered is normal and it's something I should have accepted in order to fit in, which is definitely something in my 20s I've grown out of.
Yeah.
But, it's disappointing when you look back on it, and it takes a lot of personal healing to be able to speak about it.
And you talk about sort of casual racism. I think Australians are so notoriously bad with casual racism. And you're saying now that it's something that you don't deal with as much in your 20s, or do you just call it out more and don't put up with it anymore? Is that more the case?
What I think is that all of us, no matter where we are in the world, and this is something that, the Black Lives Matter movement has definitely brought to the forefront of conversations, a lot of people have different ideas about what it is to be racist. And sometimes people think it means, overtly hateful actions or thoughts or ideas. But what we're learning now is casual racism is the result of people not understanding what racism is. And what racism is it's a system that we're all born into that conditions us to have these unconscious biases. And, people who are loving and, they don't even mean any harm, they might not realize that there are, things that they benefit from within this system, or they're unfairly perpetuating it. So when you have casual, instances of racism, I'll still get things like, "You're so pretty for an Indian." And I think like the idea of, you mean well. And this actually happened to me as recently as right before COVID hit. I was out for dinner with my girlfriend, and a couple came up to me and had said that. And I was, quiet about it and just thought, let's just have this nice dinner. But it was my best friend who got up, and she's, not a woman of color, and said, "Hang on, just letting you know, when you say things like this, it has an inference tied to it around, well, in order to be, pretty, you cannot look like a South Asian because South Asians look a certain way." So I think it reflects, a lack of intentionality in what we're saying. And people usually don't mean harm, but that's why it's important to have these conversations, because it's often not ill-intentioned.
You mentioned before about things that perhaps someone who is not of colour may benefit from, things in the system that a person of colour wouldn't. What are some of those things that we might not even be aware of that we're benefiting from that we don't even realise?
Yeah, I think, it's things like, and I'll talk, for example, in the context of beauty, it's realizing that, okay, growing up, a lot of my friends who are not people of color didn't realize that we experienced exclusion and, that sense of being othered within that industry in small things like our color of makeup not being available in stores. And it's things like growing up and not even questioning and having the privilege of not realizing that it's so easy for certain people in our community to see themselves represented in certain spheres, but perhaps there are people who don't. And I think that is a privilege and a benefit that I've really loved seeing people wake up to and use that to then call out, okay, this is what we could do better.
How did that affect you growing up as a young woman?
I think when you don't see yourself represented, or you think you're excluded from certain spheres, I think it certainly shapes your ideas about what's possible for you. And I know that's true because doing things like what I've been doing now, I've received messages from women and men who are either people of color or potentially from a community that has been excluded or marginalized. And it's things like saying, I never thought in my lifetime I would see this. And growing up as a woman, I thought, well, maybe it's not possible, but you kind of follow the breadcrumbs, which is, what I like to say, I think I did in terms of opportunity to opportunity. And, if you told me maybe 5 years ago you would have done something like this, it would have seemed impossible because it's a really big feat. It's like, how would I even pull that off? But growing up, I just sort of had to unlearn little bits and pieces and tackle one thing at a time to be able to ultimately get to a point where I am able to show up in certain arenas and speak about the things that matter.
And we wish Maria the very best of luck when she represents Australia on the world stage at Miss Universe whenever COVID allows. You can listen to the rest of that episode on the website shedoesthis.com/listen. Well, we've arrived at number 1, the most listened to episode of the She Does This podcast in 2020. It was one of our most recent episodes with the incredible Samantha Jade. She's an ARIA award-winning singer-songwriter. She's worked with some of the biggest names in the business, and she is just downright lovely. We spoke all about her rise to fame in Australia, but also years of hardship that went into building her career prior to all of that. And her career started when she was just 15 years of age, and the whole family uprooted their life and moved to LA, which was a really interesting experience for them all, and it was really cool to hear about. So here's some of my chat with Samantha Jade.
You signed a development deal with a record company very early. How old were you when you signed that?
I was 15 when I signed the deal, and then you kind of have to wait till you're 16 to kind of, work with, the parents and all of the things that go along with all of the age stuff. But I was working essentially from when I was 15, and it was what I wanted to do. But my mum and dad were very adamant that, I finished school, and, when you're at that age, you don't know things. You think you know everything, but you don't. And they were like, we know you love singing, but this is a huge move in life, and they wanted to make sure that I was definite. And so they came with me. My mum, of course, was with me everywhere, but the whole family moved over when I got a proper record deal. So I was signed to the development deal, and then the label kind of came in, and that's when it got serious. So the label of Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake and Usher and Alicia Keys. Like, it was insane. It was just the people that I've always looked up to were now my peers, and that was so weird. I'm from Perth. Like, it was just so different, such a different life. And I always had my family there, and I think that is truly the only reason that I'm okay.
Like, it's a crazy place, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So what was that like, being so young? And I remember when I was young in the industry, very green. How did you not let that go to your head? Do you credit that to just having your family there, or were there other people around you sort of supporting you in that?
Do you know what? I think it's a combination of my family, because they would be like I'd come home from the recording studio and my mum would always be there. So I always had a moral compass right next to me. But I'd come home and my dad would be like, hasn't been loaded or unloaded. Like, you need, like they would do that. They were like, you need to still do your stuff at home. And my brothers were doing homeschooling at the time, and I was their French teacher. I knew no French, but I was like, want to learn French, so I'll teach them. So I still had to do that. Like, I just kept normal things.
Yeah.
I'd be in the studio 1 minute with, Rodney Jerkins and Timberland, and then be doing that. So my life was so, a mixed bag. And I also think being green, I think that I was just so excited. I wasn't cocky. I was just like, what is going on? Like, this is my life. And my mum always did say to me, this may not last forever, so just really enjoy it, because this is not normal. And I knew that going in. So I think I never thought like, I deserve this is my life. I knew what an incredible opportunity it was.
And how are your brothers, like, having their whole life, like, changed for your dream? How was that?
Well, they were super young. So they're 7 and 9 years younger than me.
Right.
They're baby brothers. So they were kind of like in primary school still. And my mum and dad really wanted to keep the family together. And so we moved over, and I, at the time, was doing a school tour. That's what you used to kind of go around and do school tours. And so you'd go sing at all the schools, American schools too. So scary. So I would do that. And my brothers would come and like watch with my dad. And we went to this one school, and it said no weapons, please, like a no. And that scared them so much that they were like, we're homeschooling, we're not going to school, we don't want to go to school. So they ended up doing homeschooling for the 5 years that they were there. And my dad kind of taught them, which was crazy. And also they wanted to stay in the Australian system, because I think we're a year ahead. But it was I think now, like, speaking to them now they're adults, of course, they're so happy they had that experience because they're like, we ultimately grew up in LA.
Yeah.
Which is cool in a way because, and now they live back in Perth, but they know the world. They traveled, they saw a lot of things. They were on video sets from when they were like 6 years old. Like such a different life that they've lived.
So talk to me about the development deal and what goes into that. I was watching Guy Sebastian talk about development deals. He was on TV a few weeks ago and he was saying how, that there's this tier of singers that make it, but under that are so many singers in these development deals that don't
go anywhere or make it a job.
So what is a development deal and what does that involve?
Basically, it's kind of like bringing people in to then develop all their skills. So they bring in someone that can sing, can dance a little bit, has the look, wants to learn, and then you kind of go through developing all those skills. And so for me, it was basically learning to songwrite, and I loved writing little poems and little stories, and so learning to make those into songs. And I danced a little bit, but not really, so they put me in dance rehearsals, and I'd never had a vocal lesson in my life. I just sang from, knowing songs.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's like a school. It's like a school of performing. And you just work on your craft and perfect your craft. But the hard thing about it is it depends on who is signing you to this development deal. And I was unfortunate because my deal was now looking back, I didn't know it at the time, but people that thought that they owned me basically. So because you are young and because they are putting you in all these classes and doing all these things, you then, it's that thing that you then form a bond and you feel like, oh, can I do it without them? Where it's actually you're the one actually doing it all and, learning these skills. And you can't learn, I feel like, and you would know this, you can't learn, you can learn to sing, you can't learn what the power of singing is. That's an innate thing.
So unfortunately the deal sort of didn't work out. It didn't work out for you in LA. So what was that like coming home? When did you realise this isn't working out, this isn't me?
It was tough. I was there till I was 21 and then assigned till I was 21 on Jive. And it was a whole lot of things. It was my management filling my head with things and me listening to them. And ultimately we left. We actually didn't get dropped. We left the deal. We were like, my management said to me, we're going to get you another deal straight away. Don't worry about it. You don't need this deal. And I just believed them because you do when you've been ultimately brainwashed for a long time, you are like, they know best. And it ended up not being the best decision, but hindsight, I stayed there for a little while and I sang on Glee, that TV show Glee. I was doing like background vocals for it, yeah. And that was really cool because ultimately I love singing. So I was fulfilling my cup a little bit because I was still singing. And then I just kind of went around kind of writing and all those things. And then I had this meeting with a really big record exec. And he was buttering me up and I was like, oh, my gosh, I'm going to get a deal. And, everything's a deal. Like now, not so much, but back in the day it was like a deal was everything. And I was like, oh, my gosh, this is it. I'm going to get my next record deal. And then he said to me, you're a great singer. You're a great, great vocalist, but you don't have a star tone. It's not memorable. Yeah. And I was like, okay, all right. And he's like, so we're going to pass. And I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah. And that was, as someone who's so bruised already, that was it. That was the nail. And I was like, okay, now I don't have anything left because it took so much for me to go to that meeting.
Yeah.
And so I knew in that moment that I needed family. I needed people who knew me for me and I needed realness and I needed Australia.
Yeah.
So I packed up my life and I came home.
Well, there you have it, the top 5 most listened to episodes of the year. I want to thank every woman that has been a part of this podcast this year. I've been so lucky to have so many amazing conversations with just incredible women in the Australian media and business landscape. I'm so grateful for everyone's time and effort on this podcast. We will be back in your earbuds early in 2021 with more conversations with women on how they do it. So make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay up to date. In the meantime, you can check out the site on the daily, shedoesthis.com, and of course follow us on the socials. Just search She Does This. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.